very much, David, for that very long, and it's sort of strange listening to it, that very long introduction. I'm truly honoured. Good afternoon, Lions. On the 1st of July 1925, Helen Keller, the famous American blind and deaf author, presented at the Lions National Convention. Amongst other things, she asked Lions members and clubs to be kind to the blind. And it's quite true that throughout the last century, Lions clubs have done an enormous amount of work for blind people. More recently, in 1990, in the world of Lions, there was an initiative for prevention of blindness, which was supported by clubs around the world. And in 1998, there was the Lions Sight Day, again concerned with prevention of blindness around the world. Lions was founded in 1916/1917, Melvin Jones, I guess, being its most famous secretary. And the idea was, and it's still relevant, very relevant indeed, that there was more to life than business or earning a living. That the true breadth of life and living involves service to others, and hence the Lions motto of I serve. In these days of the pandemic, of bushfires, of floods, of wars in Europe and around the world, it's time to take a value and stock of our lives. And I think one of the best things we can all do to enrich other people's lives and also our own lives is to serve. It's actually human to serve. Human to give, human to receive. So I admire the work of Lions around the world, 1.4 billion lions, lionesses and lion cubs, etc., etc. And I was greatly honoured when Lorna Gordon asked me 15 months ago, would I come? And given the work that Lions has done for the blind, and given the personality and depth of Lorna, I'm honoured to be here, and so is my wife, Professor Mary Crock. I have written a book, Born at the Right Time, and it's now being sold in post offices. It's on Kindle and iBooks. If you want to read it, that's fine. My advance is still bigger than any royalties I've received, so don't worry about it. I thought I'd talk today about blindness and technology and why I think I have been fortunate as a human being to be born at this time. I was born 73 years ago, between 8 and 10 weeks premature. That's not so much these days, but it was a lot in my day. The only way to keep us alive was by using pure oxygen. This caused the blood vessels in the eyes to disintegrate. It's a complicated process. It eventually caused the retinas to fall off the backs of the eyes and off the optic nerves. So that for all intents and purposes, at some point in my 2 weeks in a humidity crib, I lost my sight. There are about 10,000 of us retrolental fibroplasia children in the developed world, Britain, Canada, Australia. In 1955, with some very clever ophthalmologists, including the early work done by Kate Campbell in Melbourne, they solved the problem. Some of you, I guess, will have had preemie children And looking at this audience, I'm so excited to be a granddad. I thought they were all old until I became one. Some of you may have had grandchildren preps, and now they do extraordinary things with oxygen and make sure that they don't lose their sight. Someone said to me, "Aren't you sorry you weren't born after 55? I said, "Well, perhaps, but what if I'd been born before 1940? I wouldn't be here." So I'm happy to take it as it is. We've learned about the Queen's, I think it's 75th anniversary on the throne. That's right. No, it's not. It's 70th. It's 70th. Well, 70 years ago, when she was being crowned, my mum was reading a story to me and my two older brothers. And at one point, she was talking to the boys, or my brothers, about the pictures of crowns. I put my hands up to feel the page, and she said, "Remember, darling, you can't read. That's because you can't see, and you can't see the crowns, but I can describe the pictures to you." And I remember thinking, about 3.5 or 4, that's exactly what I want to do. Little did I know that I would end up doing that because of technology and the sheer willingness of inventors to try their hand to help the blind read. My life was fairly ordinary. There was domestic violence in my early years, which I don't really want to go into because it still makes me shake. Well, I went to special blind schools where I learned Braille, and Braille is a series of 6 dots like that, invented by Louis Braille as a 15-year-old in a blind boarding school in 1824. And when I was growing up, there were very few Braille books. In fact, it was women transcribers, mainly women, who'd been brailing books in Australia since the 1890s. In fact, when I was growing up, there wasn't a Braille printing press in Australia. So the problem with Braille is, the dots come up from the paper up that way. So how do you make them? You've got to push them from the other side, right? So as well as learning to read from left to right, I had to learn to write them backwards, right to left. So you had to learn what the letter was frontwards. Those 3 would be R, 4 left dots would be R, 1, 2, 3, 4. That's the way I'm reading it. If I'm writing it, I've got to write it that way. So for a 6-year-old, it kept me busy. And then you learn Braille music, which you also have to learn backwards. I was a reasonably scholarly kid. My school was right next door to a shelter workshop, so I knew that most blind people ended up there or as telephonists. I thought, this isn't going to be me, I'm going to do my best. And I had some extraordinary teachers. My kindergarten teacher at that school ended up reading me law books when I was at university because she said it was important. In 1956, I saw my first wire recorder. I bet no one here has seen a wire recorder. You all know tape recorders? Well, a wire recorder was invented before tape recorders. Before they had tape, it was like fishing line, and you could record on it. The first one had been used on the battleship Missouri to record the surrender of Japan when Douglas MacArthur took the surrender from the Japanese generals and recorded on wire recorders. I thought, this is a great way I could have books and listen to them. Later on in the 60s, I got tape recorders, and they became my workhorses right up until 1990. I went to law school at Melbourne's Monash University, and there I had to find students and friends to read onto tape law books. I could always get people to read criminal law, what we were saying. Try and get them to read property law and novel to season it. I would love to have been a barrister. Barristers are very much actors, and I've taught many of them now. I've taught for 50 years. So, barristers, they're interesting people. They're always twitchy, waiting for the next court hearing. You're only as good as your last case. But I realised that if I did that, knowing lawyers would want to win and make a dollar, they would smother me with documents, and how would I read them? So I decided I would become an academic. That meant going overseas, and I was helped by Melbourne Legacy at the time. And I studied employment law overseas in Canada, and came back and taught at Monash. And mid-80s were quite extraordinary. First of all, after 6 weeks, Mary and I decided to get married. If my children said that, I'd say, just a minute, tell them we don't have money. But we decided to get married. Married me on a whim, I think. But anyway, we had some children, and then my world changed not only with marriage, sex, sexuality, and children, but technology. And this is what I want to spend a few minutes on. I want to talk to you about computers. You know, the Apple computer. Does anyone know when that came out? Anyone want to guess? Big voice, as I say to class. No. About 1983-84. There were earlier big computers used in offices. Any of you ever used the Wang? Yeah. Nothing in 6061, I can assure you. So the word processor, as we know, came out in the early 80s. And there was a man called Ted Hetner. He was born in the Panama Canal Zone, part of America, and grew up and became an engineer. And he was a jock, to use an American expression. He was a motorcycle racer, racing bikes. He was on holiday in England, as he said to me, and I met him in Geneva. English drive on the wrong side of the road, and I had a few drinks, and I fell asleep, and I hit another car, and I wasn't wearing a seatbelt. I went through the windscreen and lost my sight. Thankfully, he said, no one was injured. He then decided if he couldn't ride bikes, which was a bit difficult, he'd become a world-blind water skiing champion, which he did. And then computers came, and he thought, oh my God, a glass screen destroyed my eyes. That's the windshield, as the Americans say. And now there's a screen that I can't see. And so, because he'd had an education when he had sight and was an engineer, he established with Bill Joyce a program called JAWS, Job Access with Speech, what we blind now call Sharky. He worked out that, particularly with the DOS program, you could find out what was on the screen and have it read out in high quality synthetic speech. I got my first computer in 1987 when our eldest son was a month old, and it had 84 Ks of memory. I think my Apple Watch has about, 20 times more memory. But for the first time, I could read back what I'd written. I once wrote a 600-page book by memory. There were a lot of quotes in it, but it was a lot of memory. And so, he worked out that now I could read what I'd written. And now I could download files and read them. And before I knew it, when I moved to Sydney, we had the internet. And suddenly you could get books and legal decisions from the internet. This gave me enormous freedom. I could not have been a dad, a husband, a dean of a law school, a board member of various charities, and the chair of the United Nations Committee in Geneva without that sort of technology. And later on, we had the person of an American at Massachusetts Institute of Technology who invented the scanner that could read material. Okay. The scanner that could read material. It's charge coupled scanning. I won't go into it, but he made it that you could put a book. His name was Ray Kurzweil. He's rather strange man in some ways now. He invented the translation machine too. And the way it works is it looks at a letter and tries to recognise, the big letter A that's between the bar across? Well, it has 7 characteristics of each letter. And if it gets 5, it will say that it's an A. Sometimes in law, you have the section of a statute, section 1, 2, 3. The way lawyers write it, they write S, 1, 2, 3. And every lawyer reading the book knows what it is. But lawyers are using their minds, and a machine doesn't in that sense. If it sees S, 1, 2, 3, it thinks, is this an S or a 5? And it looks at the context, and it says, because it's before 1, 2, 3, I'll call it 5, 1, 2, 3. So sometimes when I'm reading, I have to be aware of that. Now, all of that technology of the 90s is now on my iPhone. I read books on my iPhone, which has a voice. I can read Kindle books. I can scan books with my iPhone, believe it or not. All of that technology is now in my phone. Do any of you have your iPhones here? I want to talk to you about, just get your iPhones out for a moment. I want to talk to you about universal design. It's important that disabled people have products that we can use. We spent some time a couple of years ago when we needed a new washing machine, looking for a washing machine that I could work. They all had these flat screens, which aren't very good to me. And so what we disabled and blind people have been arguing about is universal design. And the best example is the iPhone. Do you all know, now look, do not press a button without asking me, okay? I don't want to get into trouble. Do you all know settings? Can you all go to settings? Find settings. Do you know settings on an iPhone? How do I explain that? There are similar things on the Android, and it's also a very good universal design, but I don't know it as well. So if we go into settings and we go along past general, you've got to go a little way, you've got, I don't know, I'm now trying to remember. But can you all get to general? And past general, you'll see accessibility. Can you get to accessibility? This, now please be careful what you press. If you press on accessibility, the first thing you'll see is vision. Is that right? And voiceover on. Do not press that. That will turn the voice on in your iPhone, and it will do a number of other things. When you want to open an app on your iPhone, my understanding is you just tap on it on the screens and the app opens. But for a blind person, that's no good, because how do you find the app that you want? And so once the voice is on, you go along the screen and it announces the app. And if you want to open it, you've got to go tap, tap. You turn the voice on. I'm not going to have to try and turn it off. Okay. I've had people go to Apple stores to try and get it turned off. If you go beyond voice, you'll see that there are issues about magnifying the screen for those with limited vision. There's also different hand gestures if you suffer from cerebral palsy. And there's also for persons who are deaf. My assistant is deaf, and she loves her iPhone because she Bluetooths it to no, she doesn't do ABC, a classic FM, pardon me. She has some more modern stations, she's only 30. But she has two small children, toddlers, 2-year-old and a 4-year-old. And she's worried about them crying at night. So she has a particular app that's attuned to a toddler's cry. And if the app picks up a toddler's cry, it sends a signal to her alarm pillow, which shakes the living daylights out of her, and she can go. Now, I don't know how much time I've got, but the other thing I use is apps. There's one app called Be My Eyes. This is an app that shows the benefits of giving and communitarianism. It was started in Denmark. I think it now has 1 million blind subscribers, and more importantly, 5 million volunteers. When you get the app, Be My Eyes, it's free. They say to you, well, first of all, what is the language you're speaking? Do you want to be a recipient, like me, or do you want to be a volunteer? If you're a volunteer and you have that app opened, you can receive a call from a blind person if they need help. One person I knew blind, she took a pregnancy test and she couldn't bear waiting till her husband came home that night. So she called up Be My Eyes and she said, "What colour's on the stick?" I've used Be My Eyes. Mary went out, I'm not being critical, and I was going to lunch, an important lunch. I was trying to earn $1. And I thought, I don't know which tie is going to go, so I cleaned up our bedroom and I put all these ties along the bed. And I called this person up. And I said, "You're a Be My Eyes volunteer." I said, I turned my phone around and I said, "This is my shirt, this is my suit. Now, what tie?" I said, "I got them on the bed." She said, "Go closer to the bed." And she said, "Second from the left." So I picked it up. She said, "That'll go well. I hope you do well." I said, "Can I ask you where you are?" And she said, "You know under the rules you're not supposed to." I said, "Yeah, but I'm me." She said, I'm in a Singapore bank." Well, to say, when I'm finishing, let me say, first of all, I've had an extraordinary life. Not every person with disabilities gets a chance to marry and to have children, and now to have a granddaughter. It's like the icing on the cake. Not everyone works in the United Nations on every continent in the world bar Antarctica. And I think I'm so grateful that I was born at a time when this technology became available. I knew people when I was a little boy who were blind in World War I and came home to nothing. Similarly, in World War II. I'm also aware from my United Nations work with Mary and I, who've done work on refugees with disabilities, that the equipment I take for granted and the iPhone apps I take for granted are not available in most of the world. And that of the 31 million totally blind people in the world, only about 20% of us have these opportunities. And of the 150 million people with low vision and often who are legally blind, again, less than 20% have these difficulties. So I'm grateful, and all I say to you is I value your work of service. I think service makes us completely human. And in these troubled and dark times, we should value every second we're on this planet with loved ones, with sentient beings, and even with minerals. Bless you all. I'm happy to answer questions if there's